So much going on in the world right now. I've been covering the Russia-Ukraine war and now possibly a Middle East war or World War III. We are right now in the midst of a heated situation on the Gaza Strip with Israel and Hamas, and now finding out that Iran has been supporting them and Iran got money from the United States. It's a big mess. And here to help clarify is Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub. Colonel Gaub, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, Stephen, it's a pleasure to join you. And like you said, it's a tough time to be on having to talk about the things that we're going to have to talk about. But
Yeah,
I think it's best that the Americans all understand what's happening and
yeah,
why.
yeah. So this situation's been horrifying. I've been monitoring it all weekend. I'm watching missiles launched and taking out buildings. I'm watching bombs go off, people screaming for their life, dust blowing into the air, watching families with young children be attacked and kidnapped in real time. How did the United States CIA and Israel's Mossad miss such a huge situation? How were they so caught off guard by this attack?
Yeah, from the intelligence community, I will tell you that is the question of the year at this point. But I guess I would start off by asking the question, did they not know? And then, because it's going to take some convincing to tell me that none of them, include, and also, by the way, Shin Bet in Israel didn't know something. Now, I'm willing to be wrong, and I'm hopefully wrong. And somehow this is just one of the world's largest intelligence failures. But we're talking about one of the most surveilled borders in the world. The comparisons are essentially North and South Korea, and that's really about it as far as people with eyes on an intelligence system and everything that's extremely mature on a very small piece of ground. How this is missed is amazing to me, and so it's going to take a bit to tell me that this something wasn't known somewhere.
Yeah, it reminds me of 9/11, where it's like, okay, I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist, but there's like so many failures in the intelligence apparatus that it does make one wonder, was a blind eye turned? Did they know something was coming? Um, what really happened in the Gaza Strip this weekend?
I
Excuse
think it gives us a safe ground to stand on to say that it's worth asking the question, being skeptical. It doesn't mean that either one of us is necessarily sitting here saying that we know they did know, or we know that they didn't know. But if we just assume they didn't know and assume everything else away, then I guess we're avoiding maybe the harder question.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The other thing that's concerning to me, Colonel, is Iran. We now know that Iran was helping Hamas in planning the secret attack. And not long ago, the United States returned $6 billion in cash to Iran in exchange for 5 Americans. So while that's happening, we're giving them back massive amounts of cash, literally planning an attack on Israel. Now we have people being kidnapped, hoping to create terror, hoping to receive large sums of cash in exchange for American hostages. I mean, how bad of an idea was it that President Biden so publicly gave billions of dollars to Iran in exchange for American lives?
There's a lot there, that's for sure. Um, well, let's start out by saying that really all we're dealing with is Obama foreign policy failure version 3.0. And that's exactly what you're seeing. And what is that foreign policy failure? It's magnifying and paying off our enemies, such as Iran, and driving a wedge between even allies in the Middle East. I mean, let's look back to the Abraham Accords and what Trump was doing, trying to create a quasi NATO structure with Middle Eastern nations cooperating against the greatest threats like Iran. And what I would simply call not terrorist organizations, but non-uniformed members of Iran's military. You would call them Hezbollah and Hamas. I'm just going to call this a foreign invasion into Israel facilitated by Iran. And I don't blame Israel at all. for saying that they're going to go into the Gaza Strip and clean it out. In fact, that is exactly what I expected as we continued to watch what was happening in Israel going past the last few months. And the reason why is because of things like the Yom Kippur dates. The Jewish calendar is worth watching when it comes to critical events in world history. And whether it's cosmically aligned for some reason, it doesn't really matter. The dates were used for a reason, and that's worth taking a look at. Now, there's also another piece, and then I'll hand it back to you, which is this $6 billion, which is just, again, another version of Obama 3.0, where we're paying Iran stacks of cash, and we expect them to use this money for humanitarian reasons. I hope nobody is really naive and thinks that that's what would happen with the money. This argument right now is that, well, this money never actually got there. It's still frozen in an account, and they don't have it. And it's also only supposed to be used for humanitarian goods and reasons. Well, first of all, it doesn't matter whether the money's there or not at this point. The whole point being that we were willing to pay them for our own hostages. And we're naive enough to think that Iran's not going to take that $6 billion and in some way use it to ensure they can keep funding their little terrorist proxy armies out to the north and to the southwest of Israel. This is a tragedy if you focus on at the human level. There's no doubt about it. And the people who committed are at fault and should be held accountable. But when it comes to nations, I'm willing to point my finger at Iran. I'm willing to point my finger at a lot of different places, but I'm going to start by telling the people in Washington, D.C. that that's where the act needs to get cleaned up first.
So yeah, this was my first worry when I saw this money was being released back was, number one, are other people going to start kidnapping Americans hoping to get over $1 billion per American? And then number two, was Iran going to use this money to support Vladimir Putin in attacking Ukraine? Little did I suspect that this money would end up going towards attacking Israel, possibly. I mean, again, we don't know what's happened with that money, but we do know that the United States said to the American citizen, this money is being released for humanitarian aid only. And that same day, over in Iran, they said, we'll use that money however we want. The United States doesn't tell us what to do. So there's clearly a disconnect on what that money was going to be used for. Another friend of mine, Colonel Tony Schaefer, he sent me a video this morning of just in the last week, National Security Advisor to the White House, Jake Sullivan, said, all is well in the Middle East. In fact, it hasn't been this quiet in decades. So is there a possibility that our intelligence apparatus was sitting back on their laurels, or things were quiet and so they weren't being as active in their gathering of intelligence? Could it be that they were overwhelmed with intelligence and didn't know how to sift through all of it? I'm just trying to figure out why the lead person at the White House would say all is well and quiet in the Middle East, and a week later we're seeing the horrific images on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC.
Well, I guess you could say that the potentials are always there for resting on laurels. But when it comes to this administration saying something and the opposite happening, it seems to be more their modus operandi than out of the usual. So, when Biden comes on and makes a statement that we will stand behind Israel, and I say, okay, ask the Afghans how well you should believe that. And frankly, if the CIA were really looking all that hard in the Middle East, they probably would have seen it. But I don't think you're just simply not going to see something if you're not looking for it in the first place. And yeah, you can wrap your tinfoil hat up a little bit and stick it on top of your head and say, were we part of orchestrating this? Well, directly or indirectly, I would say the messaging that we've set up by putting Iran back on a pedestal as a friend of ours who we're willing to bribe for hostages, in many ways, we are at fault for this. And this is just the natural result of telling Hezbollah and Hamas that we've ultimately got their back and we're not going to do anything. How does this help Russia? Well, whether there's money transfers directly or not are almost irrelevant. The simple fact that now you've got the world's attention on Israel and what's going on with where the conflict is at scale now and how it could grow bigger, hopefully not, because Israel can handle it right now. But this kind of a distraction, this kind of opening up of another front of conflict on the global scale works to Russia's advantage. You tie that to no longer funding Ukraine out of America, which there's plenty of arguments to be made for not giving Ukraine another dime. Then, all right, what you're really doing is you're weakening what's going on in Europe. You see, Russia's really probably about to win in Ukraine, and now you've got another front of a war opened up with another foreign policy failure and challenge for an administration that has a hard time even handling its own White House and its own communications. So what's next? That's our thing. Blano with Brigadier General Blainhold and I started Restore Liberty, and we called when Afghanistan happened, we said Ukraine was next. And then we said something more than likely in the Middle East, and we've been really focused for the last few months on them and have been warned for many months what was going on and what was likely to happen. But, mainstream media generally doesn't want to hear predictions of what's most likely to happen. They like to talk about it when it is happening. And so now we're concerned about how does China respond to a distracted world and deal with Taiwan itself. We don't know, but that's been on our radar too.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Okay, there's been at least 800 confirmed dead, another 2,500 injured. Israel is now promising to completely siege the Gaza Strip. Do you think Israel will be able to overwhelm the forces at Gaza, or will the U.S. military be pulled into this fight? We know there's at least 9 Americans that have now been killed and over a dozen taken hostage. That's what we know of in the last 24 hours. Is this going to pull the United States into another Middle Eastern war?
Well, first of all, that the expansion of this conflict is certainly something that's worthy of concern, because this is like an alignment of the Brotherhood, and all these videos are not about they're recruiting videos for the jihadis and the crazies. We'll leave it at that. But that expansion is certainly a possibility. Israel can handle it with where it's at right now. The Gaza Strip is something they are very capable of handling by themselves. We do not need to be pulled into this. The question remains, what if it expands and starts getting into nation states getting involved? Bigger picture, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and you can continue to find those around the world who would be interested in getting involved in this in solidarity or some other way. And that's a legitimate concern. But I'm going to bring that back and say the U.S.'s involvement in something like this is not up to the President of the United States or the Department of Defense on their own. We as America have to get back into the constitutional bounds of who declares war in this country. And that is solely owned and has never been delegated outside of the U.S. Congress. Those decisions are deliberated in there and voted on in Congress only. And if I were to ask for a command structure from a commander-in-chief on down into a lot of the general officers in the military to oversee a conflict near or around Israel, this is one of the worst times in American history to trust any of that leadership. And that's pretty sad.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. It also makes me wonder, do you gang up on somebody when their big brother is there or when they're away, right? If you were in like a street fight, right? So America's the big brother of Israel. Israel can handle their own, but they also kind of know that they've always got their big brother in their back pocket. Is there any chance that Iran and Hamas and Saudi Arabia and others are going, wait a minute, the United States is publicly broadcasting that they're running out of weapons and ammunition? Big Brother is about as weak as he's been in a long time. Now might be a really great time to do a coordinated sneak attack on one of our biggest enemies. Do you think any of that plays in? I mean, I'm sure they have TV over there.
I think that has played in since the day Joe Biden walked into the White House. Failure in Afghanistan is a message heard around the world by everybody who opposes the Americans in general, whatever that looks like. So what does that mean? Russia says, I'm going to go ahead and move on Ukraine now because America failed to give us a promise to keep Ukraine out of NATO. And there are many ways to deter that. Other nations are now going, we've got a window of opportunity while America's greatest weakness is sitting in the White House. We're going to take advantage of it. We're going to go ahead and move on Israel using our proxy armies now, and we're going to see what it grows into. And it's possible that Iran and others are waiting for this reaction from Israel in order to call it an overreaction and broaden the scope of this war and bring all these other nations on board saying, hey, look what Israel's doing. And if you say, well, that will never happen, well, how corrupt is our mainstream media and how quick are they to spin a narrative that would make Israel look like the bad guy in all this? And there's plenty of arguments to be had, but I'm trying to put myself in the minds of the people like the mullahs in Iran and what they could be doing, because they're not stupid. I was told over 24 hours ago that a senior member of the Iranian army was up in Lebanon helping plan and synchronize all this and then authorizing it on behalf of the Iranian government. So that should not be a shock to anybody.
Wow. A lot of coordinating forces going on behind the scenes. Let's bring it back to the United States for a minute. I've read that Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security have openly admitted that several hundred people on the United States terrorist list have illegally entered the United States through the southern border. How dangerous is this for a potential internal attack, another 9/11, and how bad are things at the southern border? Because one side of the table says they're not bad at all. The other side of the table says we are literally being invaded peacefully as a nation.
The correct side of that table to sit on is the one that says we're being invaded as a nation peacefully, mostly. And so this is where people talk about what's going on in Israel, what can we learn from it versus what's going on here in America. The simple fact of the matter is we are suffering an immigration invasion, unchecked, uncontrolled, and it seems largely unconcerned within our Department of Homeland Security and the White House. One of the challenges that people like myself and others who've been warning about these kinds of things for years is when they become a reality, everybody jumps on board and starts talking about how it's a terrible thing and we should be careful. Years ago, we were talking about how the terrorist cells are getting built in the United States by infiltrating people into the United States through Mexico. So how is that working now? And what does it look like? It looks like a whole bunch of fighting age young men, well-funded through Chinese money in the Darien Gap of Panama, moving up through well-established routes with logistics to support all the way to the southern border. Everything is in place to show that this is an operation run by a foreign entity to invade America with people in jeans and t-shirts. And sometimes there are people who truly are trying to make a better way for themselves. The vast majority of them right now are not. And for every one terrorist caught that's on a watch list, I can guarantee you there are far more that are getting in. And I'm extraordinarily concerned right now about these little cells coming after not necessarily people so much, but things like power grid infrastructure that could bring us to our knees on a massive scale if they were to do it right. I don't know if they can at this point or not, but that's something that if we're not thinking about it within our Homeland Security and other agencies, we're going to be caught unawares, and it could be tragic.
So you mentioned that the Israeli border on the Gaza Strip is one of the most military secure borders in the world, maybe the equivalent of North and South Korea. Compare that to the United States border. Do we even have military down there, or is it these border agents just doing the best they can, but they're basically supposed to keep the country safe with flashlights versus guns? Or the ability to throw people back into Mexico. What is help me understand the comparison between these two borders?
Well, I guess the comparison between the two borders is if you go to Gaza Strip, you'll see largely a fence with access controls all over the place, physical obstacles. The comparison is America's southern border, although it does have some fences on it, for all intents and purposes, is a line on a map that's not hard to step over. It doesn't exist. And the Border Patrol, I'm on their side. They are very frustrated by the fact that they just can't simply do their job. We have people in our organization that we talk to within the Border Patrol and other people who are private citizens that have formed their own, for lack of a better term, posses, and are working on private ranches all along the boundary in order to do the things that our federal government is failing to do. And they're very basic tasks. Just simply secure it. It can be done. There are more extreme measures you can take to lock down a border like that if you absolutely had to. And I'm pretty close to saying that we absolutely have to, because there's so much going wrong down there and what is coming across. Our nation is unsecure. We are truly suffering that immigration invasion, and we're going to see the things in our streets that are being seen across Europe right now. And one of the most violent nations in the world right now is actually Sweden. And they're using their military to support cleaning up from all the crime that's going on there. And that's just one example. And I deal with veterans in the Global Veterans Coalition that I started in multiple countries. And they send me information about these events all over the world. We're going to see it here soon, very soon, if we're not very careful. And I think it's too late.
Oh, wow. Okay, so obviously Biden either knows the border's open, or his dementia and the lies being fed to him through the intelligence or compromised people at the White House level. What happens if we get, for example, a second term of Donald Trump, or an RFK Jr. who has now vocally said, I've been to the border, it's worse than you can imagine, compared to, somebody like, Biden slips out, oh, he's so great, he forgives himself, forgives his son, forgives his brothers. Now we have a Gavin Newsom who has created all kinds of immigration havoc in the state of California. Will different potential presidents handle the border completely different, or will they all just kind of go back to the status quo?
Well, I think that, the comparison, regardless of whether it's Newsom or Biden against a Trump, is significant as far as their ultimate goals and methods. There will be a big difference in the approach. If Trump were to be reelected, my point of main concern would be the period between election and being sworn in and put back into the White House, because a lot of bad things can happen in that little period of time between November and January, especially with the federal government that is clearly working against the American people on almost every front you can possibly imagine. The next challenge is Trump can do 4 more years. 4 more years seems like a while, but in the deep state swamp environment of Washington, D.C., most of the people there will hunker down, do everything they can to upend his agenda, and just wait until the next 4 years is up. Now, whether it's Newsom or Biden, in the end, it doesn't matter. Whoever's sitting in that office, all they are is a pen and a phone and a willingness to fulfill the agenda that they are told to fulfill by others. That's why Biden's dementia has ultimately almost never really mattered. They just need him to sign things. And the real deep state people up there, including Susan Rice before she left the White House, who's running things on behalf of the old Obama administration, will just keep doing what they do. And America will pay the consequence.
Yeah, the people need to rise up and join together. Of course, January 6th made any American, Democrat or Republican, terrified of protesting or making their voice heard. Our nation was started on a revolution, and now most of us know there needs to be some kind of peaceful revolution. I don't really know what that looks like. One last question. You've mentioned China a couple of times. Are you worried about them making a move on Taiwan while there's big global distraction with North Korea and Ukraine and Russia and now Iran and Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah? Is there enough distraction for them to make a move, or are they strategically too nervous because it could end up in sanctions or stopping trade negotiations between major countries?
Well, I think it's worth it to be concerned and to keep an eye on it for sure. But we need to be careful not to treat China like this monolith with no problems either. Their economy has numerous issues. Their military is not very good, even though it's got 200 million or so people in it. And so I guess one of the things that I grew up with in the military, especially in the intelligence world when I worked in that too, was you don't always try to say this is what's going to happen. You give a couple things or three things, a range of options that can look at based on some serious analysis. One of those is China's military is not that good, and if they move on Taiwan, that's something unique for them because their military is trained and focused on internal security and policing their own people. That is their primary function in life. So if they get distracted and send a large portion of their military against Taiwan in an attempt to take over that rather large island, then maybe the people of China will realize what's happening, and now they've got to threaten on their own homeland because these people will rise back up against their own country, which is where would that start? Someplace like Hong Kong, maybe. And China's got their back door open. So I'm concerned about it primarily because a wounded animal can respond in many ways, and not often it's done through violence. And China could also do something in order to distract from their own internal issues. I don't know, but we better keep a close eye on that while the world is watching Israel and we suddenly forgot about a war in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Colonel Gaub, thank you so much for coming on, giving us your insight. If people want to follow you, other than searching you up on Substack under Darin Gaub, and we'll put that down below, is restore-liberty.org the best way to stay in touch with you and read the different material that you're putting out?
Yeah, restore-liberty.org is the place to go learn about us as an organization. Myself and Brigadier General retired Blaine Holt of the Air Force, who you know, we co-founded that organization, and we've got great people involved. So you can check us out there. My personal, most frequent posting area is on Substack, and then the usual larger social media pages of Facebook, Twitter X, and Truth Social. So we're out there just trying to message this and get the word out on as much as we can. And we'll see where this goes. And hopefully we can win this nation back in a peaceful manner.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll make sure to put those below. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen. Blessing to be with you today.